Welcome to the Whole Enchilada, a community of high achievers that fight the status quo, rebel against mediocrity, and make life happen. Let's go.
Hey, Enchilada Nation, excited for you to be here today. And this is a several-part series talking about how to increase the return on investment on your current investment portfolio. Right now, as you know, interest rates are going up. A lot of people are asking me, where are the deals to be had right now? And there are deals to be had right now. I am currently chasing those deals. But the other side of the question is are you currently being a great steward of the investments that you currently have in your portfolio? And this is a great time for you to sit back and look at and analyze, am I getting the most return that I can possibly get on the investment I already have in my portfolio? That is being a great steward of your investment. So stay tuned for this series of how to increase the rate of return on your current investments. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Savvy Investor, and we're specifically focused on the series about increasing your return on investment. If you've watched the previous videos in this series, it's the whole focus is around not necessarily around picking up more investments, which obviously we always want to be adding to our portfolio. But one of the things that I found as I've interviewed investors is a lot of times they acquire the asset and then they kind of put the asset aside. And I believe as a savvy investor, we have a responsibility to be a great steward over our investments. And part of that is analyzing it. Am I getting the best and highest rate of return I can potentially get with that investment? If you didn't watch the previous videos about how to calculate your rate of return, please go back and watch those. Today, we are focusing specifically around how to increase the revenue or make sure that you're getting the appropriate amount of revenue based on your investment property. And to help me with the conversation today, I brought in an incredible friend of mine and business partner, Asia, who manages the Green Management Group. Asia, give us a quick intro.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for following along. My name is Asia Coleman. I manage Marcus's team here in Tempe, Arizona. We manage about 220 properties currently. I have been licensed for 10 years, focused specifically in property management and residential resale with an investor focus. So really happy to be here. Thank you, Marcus, for leading this series, and excited to give you guys some good info today.
Yeah, awesome. Thrilled to have you here. I thought instead of me sharing what I think I'm the expert on, I might as well bring in the real expert, which is you. So we're gonna jump right in. And Asia, we're gonna kind of treat this as a interview conversation. We got a couple bullet points to lean on. We're gonna let the conversation go where it goes. But so let's talk first around. Obviously, the revenue with a rental property comes from rent generally. You know, we manage things, or a lot of our investors buy things from residential units, meaning condos, townhomes, single family homes, multifamily, but the same principle applies for commercial, industrial, warehouse type investment properties. So let's talk a little bit about what rental trends are doing right now, because this is where I think a lot of our investors are getting caught. Is they bought these assets several years ago. At that time, they went through the process of getting a renter in place. They may have had a couple turnovers over time, but one thing they're not keeping up on is what is happening with rental rates in the specific marketplace right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like everything with COVID, we're seeing a lot of changes in the rental market as well as, you know, the resale market. Right now, we're actually seeing trends where 59% of our tenants on average are renewing each month. So when we go to ask them what their plans are, they are planning to stay in the home. Usually we're increasing rate on an annual lease of about $85 a month of additional revenue for the homeowner. And that is kind of on par with the trends that we're seeing in the Metro Phoenix area. We're seeing that typically people are staying in rental homes for about 2 years. And, you know, just kind of trying to stay in line with rental trends right now and keep on track with what's going on in the market.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a couple interesting points there. So we know specifically with our portfolio, we're looking at almost every property on average is increasing about 85. Now, $85 per month. Now, one of the things that to keep in mind with that is we have been very, very good every year about analyzing the market. And so that's an $85 increase over a 1 or 2 year period, where if you haven't been really diligent as an investor over the last several years, say you bought this property 5 years ago, and you or your property manager aren't really diligent about analyzing the market, understanding, that could be a significantly bigger number. So if you look at $85 per month divided by an average of 1,000 or almost 1,500 a month, that's basically a 5% or a 6% increase on your rent every year, at least right now. And there's a couple things going on in the economy that are going to continue to affect that. I think one of the other things you brought up that wasn't necessarily on our list, but I think it's worth talking about is, we're some would argue that we're still in the middle of the pandemic. Some would argue that we're coming toward the tail end of it, but whatever your view is on that, one of the things we got to keep in mind is I feel like we've created an atmosphere where there's these professional tenants, right? They've learned how to take advantage of the system. And a lot of these tenants are making the claim of like, hey, based on what the government's telling me, I don't have to pay rent, or they're behind on rent, right? And so I think that's a big piece of the equation. And you've done a phenomenal job with our own portfolio of helping educate the tenants on what their responsibilities are and what opportunities are available for them if they are in fact in a position where they need some support. Catch us up a little bit on what you've seen there.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, and I hope we are not an anomaly, but I feel like we've actually had really good success with communicating with our tenants what the CDC guidelines are. As soon as that came down the pipeline, we made sure to relay all of that information to our tenants. Let them know that if they are having a hardship, to reach out, let us know so we can work with them. Anyone that set up payment arrangements with us has completed those payment arrangements and was able to stay in the home, which is always the goal. So I think it was a matter of proactive communication, but we've had really good success with keeping people in the home and providing resources if that's needed.
Yeah, I actually was blown away at how good of a job you did on that. I remember specifically the day I called you and was like, hey, what are we doing about this? And you're like, yes. Hey, calm down. It's already a process. I got it handled, which just so everybody knows here, that's generally the response I get from Asia when I call her of like, hey, have we thought about this? Chill out, Marcus. We've got it handled. So one of the things, the interesting things, let's touch on this a little bit, is right now, people are staying in their rental properties on average 2 years. Obviously, some of them a little bit more, some of them are a 1 year, depending on what their life circumstances are taking them to next. And let's talk a little bit about strategy behind this, because a lot of times investors think a long-term lease is always better than a short-term lease. Let's walk through, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I would always disagree with that philosophy. I think on its face, it sounds good, because in an investor mind, they usually think I'm going to avoid an occupancy, I'm going to have a tenant, I'm going to have someone in there long term. But unfortunately, I think that could open up a lot of potential issues down the road. First and foremost, our philosophy is that rent should be increased on an annual basis, just to maintain market rate. I think if you don't do that, you're putting yourself as an investor at a disadvantage. I mean, just alone increase in costs, services, taxes going up, things of that nature. It's just, it's to protect your bottom line. Secondly, I think that puts you in a position, if you don't have the right tenant, or the right tenant was not selected on your behalf, that's going to put you in a position where now you're committed to maybe not the best tenant, for however long the duration of that lease agreement may be. So potential damage, late payments, things of that nature.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, right? If you are going to do longer than a year lease, then I would at least make, and you've got a really phenomenal tenant with long work history, good income verification, you should pre-build in the rental increase. However, and one of the things to keep in mind right now, where unemployment is so low, generally speaking, if someone is renting, there's a reason they're renting. Now, some of those are, hey, I don't know how long I'm going to be here, whatever that is, but some of them, it may be based on financial choices they've made in the history that have made them ineligible to buy now. And so one of the things you want to keep in mind is there a pattern of bad financial choices that, yeah, they may be in a great position now, but locking them into a 3-year lease, is there a probability or a chance that they may start to make bad financial decisions somewhere along the way that would make you reevaluate it? So one of the things to keep in mind is, yes, even though we generally do a 12-month lease, we still generally have tenants stay 2-3 years, but we redo the application process every year to say, do we still have the right tenant? We determined before we had the right tenant, but do we still have the right tenant? And then they renew into the property and things generally go very smoothly, but it's that verification process, right?
Well, and arguably it's a little bit more invasive than the initial, as far as our process, the initial application, because at that point, once we decide to renew, we're actually going into the home, walking the property and making sure that it is in fact being maintained to the standard that we want. So
beautiful.
again, we are not locked into an additional 12 months when the property is in poor condition.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really important point, right? Even if you're getting a very high rental rate, but the damage being done by the tenant that is going to be significant when they move out, and that it's going to be far in excess of their security deposit, and then you're going to go through the process of trying to collect that money. Well, it doesn't matter how high a rent you're getting if you're going to have to spend a bunch of money on that turnover. You're in addition to that, not only the cost of the turnover, but the lost rent while you do the turnover work, right? So that does give us the opportunity then to verify, is the tenant taking care of the property and doing their part in protecting the asset, and are we getting the high? You don't have to choose one or the other. It's possible to have both.
Correct.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about who are the tenants right now. Like, let's talk a little bit about home ownership versus tenancy. We've seen a little bit of a shift over the last couple of years.
Yeah. So as of last year, we showed that national average 67.4% was the home ownership rate. As of 2020, 65% of renters are currently young adults. 75% of renters say they do want to own a home one day. We are showing that 42% of homeowners are between 45 and 64 years old. So I think that can, there's a market there of young professionals entering the rental market. I think that's very clear.
Yep.
And then national median rent of $1,160. So, definitely significantly lower, I think, than what we're looking at here in our market.
Yeah, and I think this is interesting, and obviously there's investors that follow us and savvy investors across the country, but it's very important to understand what your market is, right? So for example, a lot of the times when you're listening to our conversations, a lot of it is focused around the Arizona, the Utah market, kind of that corridor, which those states particularly tend to have a huge net in-migration right now, meaning people are leaving their other states and choosing to move to Arizona, Utah, Idaho, and those areas. So whatever market you're invested in, it's important to understand what the demand is from a home ownership and a rental standpoint. So one of the things that we've learned over the last couple of years as the markets continue to get hot and purchase demand increases, is the number of people choosing to rent has declined a little bit, and the number of people choosing to buy has increased a little bit. Now, the interesting thing, if you're in a market like Arizona, Utah, or Idaho, both rental and buyer demand are very, very strong, which coupled with what's going on in the US economy has allowed rents to continue to increase based on inflation and demand. If you happen to find yourself in a market where you're buying assets in a net out migration market, meaning there's more people moving out of the state than in, generally speaking, in those type of markets, you see an influx of rental properties in that marketplace. And one of the things that you'll want to watch for is you want to price ahead of the market and not chase the market. So in those markets, at some point, rental prices might flatten or decline a little bit, but it's something to keep in mind of. That the point we're making here is you must know and understand the market in which you're investing, or partner with a property management company that thinks from an investor mentality and is really going to hold that accountable for you. Any thoughts on that?
No, I think that's absolutely right. We try to pull a market update monthly where we are breaking down not only, general Phoenix area, average rents for East and West Valley, but we also try to do a little bit of a deeper dive into individual cities, suburbs, neighborhoods, so we can get a better idea of what we should be capturing for those markets.
Yeah.
Yes, everything.
Love that. Let's talk real briefly around inflation and what that plays into rental prices. Generally speaking, over the history of time, when inflation kicks in, shortly behind that, the rental prices will continue to increase as well, right? So one of the things we know right now is 2021 particularly, we've seen inflation really kick in. Now, the areas that most people are talking about in relation to inflation are like gas prices, lumber prices. There's some ones that really stand out and make the news, but what most people aren't recognizing is we're seeing inflation across the board. Cost of coffee's going up, cost of milk's going up, and it slowly is trickling into everything else. So there's a couple interesting things that happen with inflation. Number one is as building costs go up, land cost goes up, at some point the market shifts from an affordable market to an inaffordable market. And when a market becomes unaffordable, buyers will start to choose not to buy in hopes that the market will soften at some point. Now, we could argue whether it will or will not based on the economic forecast of an economy or an industry. But the point with that is even if the economic forecast is positive, at some point a buyer may say, I choose not to buy. And if they choose not to buy, then they will, in essence, the other option is rent or move in with mom and dad. Now, we do see some of that when the market shifts, but the majority of them don't want to move back in with mom and dad because they were very quick to move out from mom and dad. They didn't want those rules anymore. So we know with inflation, as we watch this, there's two important pieces from an investment standpoint. Is we need to make sure that we're appropriately leveraged, meaning a fixed rate on our properties, meaning if you're buying at today's rate, your mortgage rate or your mortgage payment will stay the same over time, and your rents will continue to increase, and it will increase your margin. It will increase your cash on cash return over time. And so another piece of our video series is going to be around and based on making sure that you're leveraged appropriately in your property to affect against market shifts, but also sets you up for the event when rents do continue to go up, that your cash on cash return should continue to increase over time, generating more cash flow, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're already seeing that, and particularly in the markets that we invest in, is rents are significantly higher today than they were before, and we anticipate that they're going to continue to climb.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about the process of upgrading your tenants. Let's say that we're talking to one of our investor partners that's really committed to being a savvy investor. They're looking at their property and they're saying, okay, well, look, Asia, I have this investment property that I've had for 5-6 years. I've got tenants in it, and they're so nice. They're good people, but they're paying me $200-300 less than what current rent rate is. And I feel bad going to them and asking them to pay more money. Do we ever see that?
All the time.
All the time.
It's funny, but yes.
So from an investment standpoint, how do we coach around that? Oh, and let's talk through the couple scenarios. One is I love the tenants. I feel bad increasing the rent. Another scenario is, man, I would love to get more, but man, I'm worried about kicking them out and being vacant. Another one is I'm worried about what it's going to cost me to renovate the house in between. Walk us through, from your perspective as a top-notch property manager, how do we mitigate that to capture as much revenue as we possibly can?
Yeah, I'm going to be a broken record on this, but this is the reason for annual increases. Just making sure that you as the investor are not left in a position where you say, okay, 2 years later, I'm continuously in the red on my profit loss because I'm, giving a charitable donation in the form of rent every month. And that is the number one pushback, is they love their tenants and they want to be good people. And I recognize that. So first and foremost, that's what I talk them through is this relationship worth you being in the red 2 years from now? Secondly, we try to remind them that not only are you doing yourself a disservice, but you're also doing the tenant a disservice if you're holding them at a lower rent, because inevitably when they go to move on, they're going to be in a position where the rest of the rental market is up with current rates. So that's another area that I try to point out.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's important. And I'm always in favor, particularly if a tenant's been a great tenant. I want to take care of them, right? I think it is a partnership. I think that's part of the fun of being a landlord is you're helping somebody with a housing situation. And I've also got an obligation to my family to make sure I'm getting the highest rate of return I can. So I think there's a couple important points we can make with this. Number one is you have to make sure that you have a strong enough lease in place that identifies what the tenant is responsible for. So in the event that you're thinking through the idea of like, oh yeah, but if the tenant moves out, it's going to cost me $5,000 to get the property back in condition. Well, if you have a good enough lease in place that identifies what the tenant is responsible for in maintaining the house, keeping it clean, more than likely, if they've been good tenants and they've been doing their responsibility, the cost of the turnover should not be in excess of the security deposit. In fact, that tenant should be getting money back. So realistically, it shouldn't be much of an expense on the turnover. Every once, there are little things that we recommend to do that are a landlord responsibility, that the timing of it makes sense. But for the most part, that expense is not that significant. So that's one piece of it, to make sure you have a good enough lease in place to mitigate that risk. And then the other one is a big mistake people make is they think, okay, well, I'll get this tenant out. We'll make sure the property's cleaned up and ready. And then at that point, we'll start looking for the new tenant. That's a big mistake as well. So one of the big things that we're focused on our side to help on our own properties, the ones we manage for other people, is making sure that we're having the conversation way prior to them moving out of, hey, what are your intentions? And if their intentions are to move out, we reset the expectations. Walk us through a little bit through that process of how we mitigate the timeline from when one tenant moves out to when we've got the next tenant lined up ready to move in, to make sure we don't have a loss of revenue.
Absolutely. So our goal is to be at 0 days on market. We really do strive for that. As soon as we get notice. So first of all, we're reaching out to the tenants anywhere from 60 to 90 days prior to the lease expiration, just depending on the time of the year. As soon as we get notice that that tenant is going to be vacating the property, we go through our procedures. We let them know our expectations per their lease agreement upon move out. We are pulling a market analysis and getting what the rent should be going forward. And then in fact, what we do is we actually start marketing immediately to agents within our office whom we know frequently work with tenants, just to see if there's anyone that we could lock down prior to that time. Then 30 days prior to the tenant vacating, we are actually going live and marketing the property. So hopefully we have it secured by the time they actually vacate and the property is turned. And like you were saying, typically our turnovers, we have great relationships with our vendors. They know our expectations. So typically it's usually only 10 days max of vacancy when we're turning the property over.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And we'll do another one of the video series here is about maintenance expense and creepy maintenance expenses, which we'll talk about, which is another great way to increase your return on investment. Asia, on average, how many applications do we get per property?
Right now, on average, we're seeing about 18 applications per property if we have to go live.
So this to me is another huge opportunity, but a missed opportunity for a lot of people is they tend to jump on the first application that comes across thinking, oh, I got to hurry and get it filled. This idea of us doing it all beforehand, we're getting on average 18 applications before the property is even vacated. We can take our time and make sure we get that right tenant in place. They're lined up. We've collected pre-move-in funds. We've collected the security deposit. We know that we've mitigated that loss of revenue to the highest possible way we can do it.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So any last things we want to talk about in relation to the importance of understanding the market, increasing your to increase your revenue as it relates to your current rate of return?
Yeah, I think, just forward thinking, anticipating the market and following those trends, and just making sure that we are reading the writing on the walls prior to, rather than turning around and realizing that we're in the red for a couple of years now and we've got to make a move or lose our good tenants.
Yeah, I love that. So thank you for being here, Asia. I always appreciate anytime I get to spend with you. I'm incredibly proud to be your partner and your friend. For those of you leaning into the video series, I applaud you guys for taking stewardship and ownership of your investments. And even these minor adjustments can have huge impacts on your current rate of return. If you have any questions for either Asia or myself at savvyinvestor.biz, you can hit the contact us button. And Asia, if they want to lean on you and your team to help manage their property, because I'm going to do a shameless plug here, nobody does it better than you guys, right? The whole point of me starting a property management company originally is I could not find one that thought from an investor mentality, and you run that company so beautifully. How do they get a hold of you?
Thank you, Marcus. You can find us at greengroup.biz is our website. Fill out a contact form or email directly asia@greengroup.biz.
Enchilada Nation, this has been another episode of the series on how to increase the rate of return on your current investments. I'm hoping you took great notes. Be sure, if you want to watch the video, to go to thewholeenchilada.biz. You'll be able to see the video there for any of the screen shares that I did during the conversation. And don't forget to go follow us on social media at The Whole Enchilada. And we're thankful that you're here, and go live life on your terms.